Right, so welcome everyone to our weekly call. Thank you to those of you able to join sort of live, as it were, this week. Let me, if I can manage to multitask without pressing the wrong button, let me see if I can share my screen to give us a little bit of structure to our conversation. So hopefully you can see that on your various devices. So by way of conversation this week, I thought it'd be useful to touch on a couple of recent events to sort of get the take of people on those, and then we move on to a few other topics. So these are sort of just about in chronological order because it's been a busy sort of few days on the discussion front. But I think we had a sort of very useful interim virtual meeting last week talking about split DNS, following on from the conversation we had about sort of split DNS use cases on this call a week ago. And as an aside, if you've not seen them for whatever reason, the recording and notes are both up and accessible as well. So if you missed it or wanted to go back to any of the content, you can easily do so. But I thought it might be helpful, firstly, just to sort of pause and see, because I think a number of people that are on the call now did make the meeting last week. So if I stop sharing for a moment, so you're not just staring at that slide, I wondered if anyone had any reflections on the discussion, either in terms of points raised or stuff not covered, and sort of any thoughts on the way forward from there. So I'll stop talking for a moment and see what people thought, especially those of you that are actually able to make the call sort of live last week. And I should say, either raise your virtual hand if you wish, or put something in the chat, or indeed just unmute is probably the best way to sort of share your views. Anyone? And thank you, Suzanne, for posting the link in the chat as well. So anyone that was on the call have any sort of reflections on it? Good, bad, or indifferent? Perhaps if I give you a starter for 10, then one thing that I sort of observed, that it seems to me that there's a need for a document with some consistent definitions, because certainly in the discussion and indeed the accompanying chat, I think there were differences of view on the precise meaning of different phrases. So having a document to actually give a consistent set of different definitions might be helpful to avoid confusion and people talking past each other because they mean different things, but by the same phrase. Whereas conversely, I don't think there was a concerted sort of push to say we don't need to do this at all. But others may have detected a different view. So I don't know if anyone agrees or disagrees on the need for a document with definitions, and equally, if anyone did detect a strong push to, we don't need to solve this particular problem just now. Glenn, yeah.
So, you know, as one of the people who helped organize and run it, it's not for me to say that it was good or bad. It's for everybody, the participants, if they got something out of it. I will say, if you haven't read the chat log that took place during the meeting, and all you did was listen to the meeting, which was, I thought the listening part was a good conversation, but I'll leave it to others to draw the conclusion on their own. But read the chat log. It's in the minute meetings that Suzanne posted. I thought there was some really good back and forth in that chat session about different options and different scenarios. That really was a great parallel to what was going on in the voice part of it. So,
yeah, That's a fair comment, I suppose. Like most IETF meetings, if you don't read the chat, you're missing out on at least 50% of the content. So yeah.
And I'll say that the reason I was hesitant to chime up is Glenn and I had a debrief after the meeting, and I shared basically the same idea. It was like, it seemed that like everybody thought it was a good meeting and like progress was made, but I can't tell what the progress was and where we go from here. Right? Like, this is the difficulty that I'm having, in that people seem to be very willing to acknowledge that this is a factor in our protocol design and usage, but it's still not clear what we do with it moving forward.
I did.
Go on, Suzanne, sorry.
Sure, sorry. I did have the impression, and just for those who don't know, Glenn and Tal chair ADD, and I'm co-chair of DNSOP. I think the two things that were interesting and potentially useful were people did actually get a little bit into the nits and details of the fact that we're talking about a large multitude of use cases when we talk about split DNS. And people agreed that whatever we do, it needs to be very clear about what use cases it's taking into account, because we're not going to be able to handle all use cases. You know, we can't be all things to all people. And, you know, getting that clear at the outset tends to lead to a higher probability of success. The other thing is the DNSOP has a fairly long history at this point of multiple RFCs that were written to set down terminology in ways that people could live with. And so if another such document turns out to be important as a step forward, you know, that's something we're reasonably sure we can do. So I thought both of those were probably useful.
Oh, thank you for that, Suzanne, because yes, I think there was a suggestion that possibly such a document will be out of scope for the ADD working group. Admittedly, I don't think either the co-chairs commented on that, but
Suzanne's exactly right. I mean, with DNSOP's tradition of the DNS terminology RFCs, that particular kind of document absolutely would be a DNSOP thing, and I think very worthwhile, right? Because getting us all on the same page with terminology is super important. You can't solve the problem if you can't even agree on your terms.
Yes, and I suppose adding to that, then potentially then be this sort of documenting the use cases, which I think there's already a good start has been made, would be equally helpful to give clarity as to what particular task or tasks the group was happy to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, on that, you know, I think there's sort of an emergent agreement that, you know, if you propose a document of here's how you do it in this, you know, for split DNS, it isn't going to be really easy to simply say, I cover all split DNS. It's clear it's a pretty broad topic. And so, you know, while a terminology document would be out of scope for ADD, it wouldn't be inappropriate for documents in the ADD said, I'm going to do discovery for this environment and then describe it. Like, this is what I work in. I don't apply to outside this environment. And I think that may be a little bit of a path forward for the document authors. But in the end, you know, the group exists because people write a document and submit it, and it works its way through the process. So I guess that was sort of a kick to everybody has an idea about discovery in their particular split DNS favorite environment. If you want to write a draft and get it into ADD, that would be a thing ADD, I guess, would consider and has shown interest in tackling that topic. We have one draft already, but you know, if one draft can't cover all environments, then maybe we need more than one draft.
And I guess from the discussion, as an observation, one draft solving all of the potential use cases seems on the face of it quite unlikely, given the diverse nature of those use cases, but I guess we'll see.
Or, you know, you end up with an organically developed solution where, you know, and we've seen this in other groups, you know, over the years where, disparate use cases get documented and a solution proposed. But the exercise of doing that, the authors can look at each other and go, "Oh, wait, here's where we can harmonize and make it more broadly applicable." But that's with such a broad topic, it's hard to get there. If you do databases, it's like creating the schema that covers every possible need, and good luck.
Yes, yeah, which is good.
At least on version 1.
Yeah. Perfect. And
I will say we already have a database that covers every possible need. It's the text record. So,
which
I thought you were going to say DNS.
Bite your tongue.
Yeah, we're in danger of going back to Rule 53 on that one. It's always the DNS.
Somebody should make a T-shirt that says DNS is not a global database.
Although it shows every aspiration to maybe get there one day, Glenn, to be fair.
Yeah, in all seriousness.
And like the 15 people on the planet that would understand what that meant.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I think part of what's going to come out of the whole issue, as discussed in all of the DNS working groups, is that there's not going to be any single solution. There's probably at some point going to be advice for operators on what knobs to turn and what to take into account when setting them. And that's, in our experience, that's actually better than nothing, even though it's not definitive. It at least narrows down the options for operators.
Is it feasible? I don't know how this works within the IETF rules, that this particular discussion or topic could continue as a sort of joint work group thing in Vienna. Is that a practicality, or is that maybe the wrong way of approaching it in terms of moving forward? And I asked that because it did seem like it was useful to have the 3 working groups sort of together. At least
that was an experiment, but at least in my view, and the DNS Op Chair's view, it was a useful one. I'll defer to Tal and Glenn.
Yeah, I'm not too fond of you DNS Op people, so I don't know.
Well, but the thing is that there's actually a significant overlap, in an IETF regular meeting among those working groups.
Yep.
That's one of the things that we lose by being all virtual, is that there's less likely to be a casual drop-in factor. But I think if we make an effort to publicize the discussions and the drafts to all the working groups, all 3 of the considered working groups, I think we can get significant cross-group, additional cross-group discussion, and that can only be good, in spite of the fact that Tal doesn't love us.
I don't like any of you.
Familiarity breeds contempt is really the issue here. So
I'm not even sure I like me. So
anyone else that made the call last week have any sort of views or other observations on the discussion and topic generally?
Particularly with any ideas that you have for, like, where do you think is the next step forward in trying to address the whole issue of split DNS in the ecosystem that we are continuing to try to evolve?
Yes, because I have to say that to your earlier conversation, it wasn't clear to me, just reflecting on the meeting afterwards, what the obvious next steps might be, which is partly why I asked the question, in case I missed something. So I'm pleased that it wasn't immediately clear to everyone.
No, the usual next step from a discussion at this stage is, all right, somebody needs to start putting words together. Somebody needs to start a draft. And, the stone soup principle applies. If somebody starts it, other people will chime in.
Yeah, and with that, I think over at ADD for IETF 113, we do have one draft out there that proposes a path forward. If I was its authors, I would be sort of trying to take what I heard in the discussion and adapt and update that draft appropriately to fit with new learnings from that potentially. I mean, it's up to them, obviously, because draft authors, it's up to them what they want to do. But I think we have some of a path forward, and I think that honestly, the joint session was less about making a final decision and more about getting a large group of people to discuss the problem space and sort of share common experiences and knowledge across that domain. And I think that went really well, frankly, from that perspective. Again, the chat log had a lot of great discussion, as did the audio. And it wasn't so much driven towards an outcome as a discussion to sort of shape the mindset of, well, where are we going? What is needed here as a group? So I could say IETF 113, I anticipate there are going to be a lot of conversations around in ADD around drafts and potentials like that. So, Andrew, how many days until our draft cutoff for 113?
That's a good question. It's not long, is it? Must be what, three or 4 weeks, possibly. Maybe not that long. I'd have to double check. As I'm currently writing a draft myself, I ought to know that, but
it's got to be coming up.
It's certainly looming, which is probably a useful reminder to all of us that might have aspirations to have something submitted before the cutoff.
The great forcing function.
It absolutely is. As somebody once said, if it wasn't for the last minute, nothing would ever get done.
Yeah, give me a second. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you, Tommy.
Well, that's almost 5 weeks. Oh no, wait, February's a little short, so 4.5.
Yeah, loads of time. Yes, for those of us in the UK, that's a good excuse to remind us all that it is indeed income tax submission deadline day today. Although you do have a month's grace, but interest starts accruing from midnight tonight. If your submission it goes in after tonight, just to cheer you up. Okay, I think that was useful. Anyone else with any other comments on that discussion? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Don't see any hands raised, so I'm assuming not. In which case, let's then move on to an even more recent meeting, which was earlier on today. In fact, is it 3.5 hours ago it started, which was the RIPE NCC hosted an open house on the European Commission's DNS for EU project, which, for those of you that are not directly familiar with what that project is, effectively it's the European Commission proposing to some grant funding as sort of seed money to stimulate the deployment of a resolver, a bit like Canadian Shield. To provide a sort of an EU-centric resolver that ISPs could use, and equally individuals could access as an open resolver directly themselves, with a particular emphasis on sort of leveraging the threat intelligence that is potentially sort of it's possible to do so from a sort of geographically specific user base. And the sort of call for proposals was issued a couple of weeks back, and given there were a few comments on the on RIPE's DNS working group, they hosted an open house at 1 p.m. UTC today, just to discuss the project a little, in the spirit of encouraging the sort of sharing of information amongst interested parties. Again, a number of people on this call were also on that, as I was. So perhaps before I share my sort of few observations, I don't know if anyone else that was on the call wants to just chime in with what they noted in that discussion. And as before, just feel free to either raise your virtual hand or just unmute or put something in the chat, whichever is easier.
I wasn't actually on the call, but do you know if it was recorded? Because I wanted to be.
That's a good question. I know that it was recorded. The recording isn't up yet because I had a quick look just before this call, Peter.
Okay.
But the RIPE team did say they will put it on the RIPE website.
Excellent.
This week sometime, as well as the slides, because structurally, Chris Buckridge did a sort of short overview to kick the discussion off, just to make sure people had a sort of base level understanding as to what the project was. And then the lion's share of the time was an open mic session, effectively. And quite a few participants in the end. I didn't write down the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it was well over 100 sort of people joined the call. I don't know if anyone else that was on it. 150.
Wow.
I said it was well over 100. So, yeah.
Not surprising, I guess.
Yes. And the discussion ran for a decent amount of time. It was probably about 45 minutes or so of discussion after the intro. And I'm sure it could have run on for longer, but they'd sort of loosely allocated an hour, so they did cut the mic queue. So I think it finished about 15:15 the hour, so it didn't run over too much. So I don't know if anyone else that was on the call had any observations or comments from what you saw and heard. If not, I'll share mine. Give somebody else a chance to go first, should they wish.
You first, Andrew.
Okay, well, why not? I'd say this unscientifically, it felt to me as though there was a roughly 50-50 split, certainly in the chat, which, as always with these discussions, probably had more content crammed in than the discussion was able to accommodate within the available time. So from the chat in particular, it was at least, I suppose, 50-50 split between those that in various ways was suggesting there was some degree of conspiracy theory, and ultimately this would be a required system to be used by everyone to enforce various things that perhaps they weren't in favor of, versus those that could see some upsides, dependent on how the system was implemented. I say 50-50 split, that's not entirely accurate. Of those that had a firm opinion either way on that, it was 50-50 split, but there's a whole bunch of other questions and comments which were more around points of clarification, so not necessarily being fully up to speed on the call for proposals. And to be fair, some of the statements that were made by people that did have firm views suggested that perhaps they weren't also up to speed on the detail of the call for proposals either. But that was my impression. So John or others, I don't know if you had an alternate view or anything you think I've completely missed.
Okay, so I'll second on the firing line here. So I think one of the interesting things about that call was, as you said, some of the unclarity on the tender. And I don't think that's simply because people didn't read it, although there was clearly some of that. I think also the tender is it leaves quite a bit open for interpretation. Yeah. And that's both a positive and negative aspect of the document itself. I think what was interesting on that call from my perspective are some of the issues that were not raised, that in looking at, and obviously, and we're looking at the document very closely and coming up with some of the questions or some of the longer term questions, and some of the things that were not raised were just as interesting, such as the commercial versus non-commercial aspects of the tender, and how does that work into the future, and then how is that treated from a political level, again, crossing borders, and centralization versus non-centralization, and adding market forces into this as well. So, I won't comment a lot more about the call. I think other than to say the last thing that I would say is that I would have loved to have had this call before the tender was issued, with someone from the commission participating and hearing some of those questions raised, because I think that that may have informed some different interpretations of how the tender was written. But we're past that point. So it was a useful call. It sounded like there was going to be some requests for additional time for RIPE to put together to have other explanations or roundtables. I think the timing on that is really tight. I'm not sure if that's going to amount to anything fruitful or not, but it certainly there was lots of interest, put it that way.
Yeah, I think those are a fair comments. And I should probably say, for those that aren't following this closely, the call for proposals was issued on the 12th of January. And at the moment, the deadline for submissions is the 22nd March. So it's not a hugely long window to form consortia, because it's a requirement to have consortia bidding to provide the service. Well, also I was surprised that the question of funding and the model didn't come up at all on the call, but maybe that might come up if they do have time to schedule a follow-on. Ralph, so you've raised your hand, so chime in.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm following this bit from the sidelines because working at an international company, we cannot bid on this. So for me, it's kind of a bit like popcorn time. Saying this, there was, I mean, part of the discussion was, and I think that was actually pretty uncontroversial, is that involvement of RIPE and RIPE NCC into this, because it was clear that, well, RIPE NCC has no stake in it other than kind of maybe advising or giving technical suggestions to this and not, of course, running it. I mean, my guess is that one of the RIPE members will be, or a consortium of RIPE members will be running this. I think that's a good guess. But that point was uncontroversial. And on the other side, yeah, I mean, it was a 50-50 split with, like we have in all of these things, I mean, people from one side and people from the other side. But it was a good meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, good observations, I think. And yes, and especially coming from someone in those evil international companies that are excluded from the sort of digital sovereignty initiative. But yes, thanks, Ralph. Peter, you've got your hand raised.
I wasn't on the meeting. I just wanted to say that. So it was a split DNS issue. That's all. That's all. That's my terrible joke. I'm going to mute myself now.
Fair enough. Thanks, Peter. Okay, anyone else on that call that had any additional points you want to add? Just give you a moment to unmute if you wish to. If not, as I say, I did check the RIPE page just before this call started, and the recording wasn't up at that point. But I think they will put it up quite quickly, given the time frame that's involved. So I'll make sure I sort of share the link when it's available, in case people are interested in catching the recording or seeing the slides. Yeah, I suppose just one observation, which certainly wasn't clear from the call, is how many sort of consortia there might be that actually go forward to submitting proposals, which I suppose is not unexpected that you maybe wouldn't have clarity on that arising from an open call like that. But I think it remains to be seen how many parties can actually make the numbers work, given the seed funding from the Commission only funds up to 50% of the initial capital costs and none of the operating costs. So that will certainly, I think, serve to be a deterrent for others. Yeah, sorry, I just sort of pick up on a question from Suzanne in the chat. So yeah, they did build in an information day, which was last Wednesday, where people could ask questions about this project, or indeed a whole bunch of other projects, which the calls for proposals all launched on the same day. What I will do, just in the chat, I posted post up last week, which included within it sort of links to various things, including a recording of the information day, for example. So I've just posted a link in the chat for people that are on the call now. If you're interested, and some of the various bits of official information are accessible through that link, if that's useful. Okay, thank you. Let's move on in that case. So I'll just go back to the slide share momentarily so you're able to follow this. So just some other things which I thought it was worth highlighting. Just take these in order that they are on the screen. Firstly, there was, again, this last week, in sort of various of the press, additional comments about sort of reaction to Apple's private relay service, which, as you'll see from the slide, a suggestion that it could be a threat to data sovereignty or digital sovereignty in various ways. And if you're interested, there's a link to that particular story as well on the slide, which I'll share the slides afterwards from this call. Also, there's clarification from Apple that none of its carrier partners have blocked private relay. I think that was really following on from sort of discussions, sort of rumours in the press over the previous 2 weeks or so, that various mobile carriers were blocking private relay. So I think Apple have now given clarification that that's not the case, or at least wasn't a few days back. So it does seem as though there was some sort of technical issues that were causing the users of some carriers to get error messages or dialogue suggesting the carrier was blocking the service, when in fact they weren't. It was down to the sort of settings on individual devices that were causing access problems. Changing the subject from that, also last week, more on the policy front, you may have seen the European Commission issued I think at the moment officially the status will be a draft declaration on digital rights and principles, where I think it's still being debated by the European Parliament and others, but I guess given the sort of track record of the sort of Commission with things like GDPR and such like, I think that's certainly well worth watching how it develops, and may well be picked up, at least the basic principles, by others if it does gain some traction. And clearly will have repercussions for the tech sector, good or bad, depending on your point of view. So definitely worth watching. I've put on the slide a link to the press release, but also Politico, I think, carried quite a helpful article giving some additional background, which is worth reading if it's a subject you haven't been tracking and are interested in. And then changing the subject again, as you hopefully are all aware, it's now possible to register for IETF 113, either in person or to attend remotely. The early bird rate runs till next week. So if you want to register at the most advantageous rate, now is the time to do so. There's good rate at the hotel in Vienna, but you only get the ability to register with the hotel once you've registered to attend in person. I think that's because there's a limited number of sort of rooms available at that rate. So it's a way of just ensuring that only people that are registered to attend in person take up those slots. And there is a time limit on the rate availability as well. So it's worth just paying attention to that if you want to attend at the sort of conference hotel, which is it's one of the Hiltons in until the 7th of February is the early bird rate. I'm not sure, Peter, as you posted that in the chat, whether the discounted rate for the hotel runs to the same date or not. But anyone that might want to attend in person, it's worth checking because it is quite a decent discount. Just before this call started, just so people are aware, there were a grand total of 87 of us had registered to attend in person, of which roughly half were from the US, and most of the rest were from various places in Europe, although curiously only one person at that point registered to attend from Austria. So I guess it is early days because the booking has only just opened up, and I guess a few people are just waiting to see how their various national policies on travel evolve over the next few weeks. Hopefully there will be a sufficient number of us that are able to attend in person to make it possible to go ahead with a hybrid event, because it will be good to have some people that present have discussions in person, maybe the odd side meeting, and who knows, even beer would be a good thing, I suspect.
Hey, Andrew, one thing I wanted to point out around the registrations is that in the FAQ that they put out, they've said that, and this is, I think, really useful, that if you do register for the on-site and then it turns out you can't go, they're going to allow you to downgrade, but also when you downgrade, you'll get the same. So if you register the early bird window for on-site, but then you can't go and you have to downgrade to remote, you'll get the early bird remote fee, which I think is very flexible on the part of the IETF. It's really nice that they did that.
Yeah.
For these uncertain times.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because funny enough, I was thinking about that before I registered. What happens if? So yeah, I was really pleased to see that if you, as you say, if you do have to downgrade from in person to remote, you don't then get penalised on the rate because circumstances have changed and making it impractical to attend in person for whatever reason. So yeah, I think that's as flexible as an event organizer can realistically be in difficult circumstances, which is really good of the IETF to do it that way. And I don't envy them having tried to organize an event like this at this time. It's going to be challenging to sort of please everyone, but I think they are trying their best. And there's a pretty good FAQ, and there's a wiki page set up as well to help with any questions people have. Okay, somebody had their hand raised. I think I may have missed it. Apologies. Who?
That was me.
Oh, sorry.
That was me, Andrew.
That was me not looking at the right window. Apologies. Thank you. Well, let me just pause in case anyone else had anything to say about IETF 113 or indeed private relay or the Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles before I move on. Just looking at I can't see any hand raised and no one's unmuting that I can tell. Nope. Okay, let me move on in that case. So I just wanted to sort of touch on some topics that we're going to cover on future calls, partly to get people's input. So a reminder that Kenji from the Chrome browser team in Google has agreed to come on in the next couple of weeks or so to give an update on the private prefetch proxy. That always defeats my tongue to be able to say that, and also how Chrome is going to support encrypted client hello. I think that will be topical because probably by the time we do the call, there should be some announcements, certainly around the private prefetch proxy development, and possibly around ECH. So we've got the opportunity to have a call with Kenji. It won't be at this time of day because he's in Tokyo, so we'll probably do something which will be sometime in the mid to late morning UK time to accommodate sort of time differences, which obviously I'll aim to record for anyone where that just doesn't work for time zone reasons. But Kenji has asked that in order to make the call as productive as possible, that we've got a list of sort of questions that he can work to, that he's had sight of in advance to just make sure he's got sort of concrete answers to as much content as he can. I know I had a few elements of input on those on those two topics on the call last week, but it's mainly a reminder for anyone, if you've got questions that you'd be really keen for Kenji to address, or just observations you want to make, please get them to me as quickly as possible. And then I'll make sure they're included in a consolidated list that we use to help structure the call.
Andrew, on that, there was one important discussion we had, I think, last time when we had a conversation, which was, is this something that they envision will be a user option they can turn on and off?
Yeah, yes. And at the time, just as a reminder, because it is a while ago when we had this discussion, I think Kenji's sort of perspective was this was a bit like HTTPS. So why would you want to switch it off once the feature was supported? That's certainly something that I envisage we will need to revisit, because I think there are use cases when it would be appropriate for the user, or dare I say network administrator in an enterprise type environment, where they would wish to disable the feature. And I think that discussion is well worth having again.
Well, and related to that, the question I would also have is, what would the browser's behavior be if it was in an environment which the environment started blocking connections that were using ECH?
Okay.
Because we've had some people make noise about that thing that they might do on like corporate networks and stuff like that, right? So,
yeah. Yeah, good point. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, that's yeah. If you can't switch it off, that will be the next consideration, I guess, to block access using ECH. Then,
hey Andrew, Arnaud here. Is there anything that looked at the batch of enterprise use cases here for ECH with ECH that are going to be a killer for enterprise security?
I will immodestly. At this point, so that this is not we haven't collaborated on this in advance, but I should mention shamelessly at this point that this is a topic that we did look at and have a round table on a little while back. So let me post in the chat, for those of you that perhaps have an interest, a link to that content. So I think the answer directly to your question, Arnaud, is yes, it's something we've started to have a look at. So this is by no means comprehensive, but a number of us sort of took a look at the sort of use case in terms of certainly the enterprise, the sort of finance sector, specifically on the enterprise side, although you could probably say the same broad points are applicable to enterprises generally. But we also looked specifically at the education sector as well, because certainly in some markets, I'm thinking here of a sort of school as opposed to university education. Certainly schools in some markets have a requirement to do content filtering for various reasons, to block access to particular content. And I know a number of the content filtering companies have signaled to me that an inability to access SNI data will be very problematic for them in terms of having effective content filtering. So if you look at there's two reports against the link that I just put in the chat, one of which are just notes from a roundtable discussion that we had on ECH in the finance and education sectors, and then on the back of that you'll see I put together a briefing. That's
good, Andrew. I think I missed the second one. I think I read the first one, but I missed the second one.
Okay, so and I potentially it's something that we will be revisiting, hopefully prior to IETF 113, given its as a side aside on ECH, it's looking at the moment like the standard may well complete this calendar year, let's say. So given where it is in the TLS working group, that's a personal view, because clearly until it happens, there's no guarantees on time frame for that sort of thing. But the work does seem to be coming to a conclusion now, as far as I can tell on ECH. So it's worth another look.
No, it's a pity I had an air gap of 18 months in my career that I could not follow that. But I think it's really late, but it's creating quite a lot of emotion in the community.
And I'm not sure that people are so outside of communities like this are paying particular attention to it, because I guess people with day jobs don't necessarily follow the sort of intricacies of the sort of various IETF working groups, unless they're able to do so because it's their day job. Yeah, I think as it comes closer, it might get a bit more attention.
I think generally speaking, Andrew, the West of this world is dropping nearly completely standardization work. So we are a very rare species that is in decrease mode, not in increase mode. So unfortunately, when I spoke recently to quite a number of executives of CISOs of Fortune 500 companies, and they are completely unaware. It was a shock when they realized what was going on. I just had to start to educate them, and they just could not believe it. So even in my own company, they are taken by shock. So yeah, I realize it's super late, but it's certainly a concern, a big concern.
Yeah, agreed. So going back to sort of Chrome then, so if anyone has got any questions you think will be particularly pertinent for Kenji in the context of the Chrome browser, please just drop me a line directly and I'll include those on the consolidated list of questions that we run through on the call with him. Also coming out last week, there was a suggestion it would be useful to cover Mask on a future call, and David Shinatsi was put forward as a potential speaker for that, not by David, I hasten to add, but his name was suggested. I've spoken to him since, or reached out to him since, and he's not able to do so. He hasn't got the bandwidth to do it. So if anyone is particularly keen on seeing Mask covered, it'd be useful, not necessarily right this minute, but again, to have your thoughts on who might be in a position to talk to that topic. That would be particularly useful. And then moving on, we will cover DNS over quick on the call next month, which is a reminder, starts tomorrow. So some point in February, we'll cover DOQ. Andrei Meshkov, this CTO at AdGuard, has agreed in principle, subject to sort of choosing the most convenient date, that he'll give an update from AdGuard's perspective and share their experiences of running DAQ Resolve for the last 12 months. If anyone else has a perspective on that would like to be included in the topic, again, just let me know, and I'll include you when we sort of finalize with Andrei. Yes.
You should post Sarah and myself about speaking in that same session, because we're in IETF last call, and it's a very stable spec at this point. And one of the interesting questions that I think we can go back to Andrei with is he up to date with the spec? There's a couple of interesting open questions about we really want to see people do padding, because without padding, it's actually giving away names pretty easily. So there's some interesting topics that the IETF spec progress would be good to include in that session. And that since Sarah and I and Christian are the three authors, I think Christian probably wouldn't attend, but Sarah and I could most likely could attend and be part of that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for saying that, Alison, because that was partly, I suppose, directed at you. So that's really helpful. And yes, I did see on the mailing list, sort of padding came up quite late in the day, and I know on this call in the past we've looked at the ability to detect. Certainly DOE rather than DOC, but it's the same general principle, using machine learning. So I think there is some experience that suggests it is.
Right. We vacillated between, we were asked to go back to a should, and we pushed back and said, no, it needs to be a must. And the question was, what should the implementer do? Because things are experimental. So we're going to go for a down ref to the not standardized padding document the DPRIVE came out with, and then give people the option to do other things, but must implement something.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's not on our mind. It's just a question that there's still not perfect knowledge of the best absolute ways to get it right for all implementations. But I think the point being that this is a very live topic, and with the RFC, with it going to the RFC editor, with good luck, we expect that we won't have to take too long to get through the ISG, and there will be, real readiness for this to go forward and be available as a standard, for people to align to the spec. So it'd be a good conversation to have with the vanguard of implementation, and then with others who are looking at the spec and getting ready to implement from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a combination, perhaps you and or Sarah talking about the standard, and then having someone who's running code as well would be, excuse me, quite interesting to have to do both combined. Yeah, excellent. Okay, I'll sort of reach out to the two of you separately, and we can coordinate diaries with Andre. I'm sure we can find a date that works for all three of you to schedule that. So thank you, Alison. That's really helpful. Okay, other topics that just a signpost I'm looking at the moment. Spamhaus published a report recently which touched on, amongst other things, the impact of DOE on threat detection. So I'm seeing if I can get someone from Spamhaus to just come on and expand on that a little, share their learning from a threat detection perspective in particular. And then I'm still, I've said this for a while now, working on more generally seeing if we can get someone from the Android team to talk about the planned support for DOE in Android 13 or Tiramisu, which is due out, I think, in the next couple of months or so. As well as, I suppose, back to discussion with Arno, potentially looking at ECH more generally beyond just the implementation sort of details within the Chrome browser. So given the discussion with Arno, I think we'll sort of make that a firm topic that we will cover. So again, it'd just be subject to finalising a date. So that's what's coming up over the next probably 4 to 6 weeks, I would imagine, as we run on. And yes, answering the question in the chat there, sort of diary permitting of the various people concerned, Arno, to try and get some of these in, if we possibly can, before IETF 113, which is not so far away as we've already discussed. So with that in mind, any sort of questions or comments from anyone else as we just run up to the hour? So let me stop sharing, see if anything anyone else wants to raise or any comments on what I've just quickly run through. So as before, please just put things in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute, whichever is easiest for you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the OARC full program for OARC 37 on February 17th, that's published. I put the link in the chat.
Perfect. Yeah, that's not so far away now, is it, Suzanne? It's only, what, 2 weeks? Wow.
No, everything is rushing at all of it.
And that's twinned with Nanog, isn't it? I think, which is also in Austin at the same time. Or
yeah, they're both hybrid meetings.
Yeah, back to back. So yeah, Austin or hybrid. Yeah, good point. Thank you for. I'll include a link to that as well with the sort of call recording. And I will maybe Arno, as you drop off the call, I'll reach out to you separately, but maybe have a chat about ECH and see what we can do on that. So anything from anyone else before we finish? Not seeing anything else in the chat. I can't see any hands raised. In which case, we're just on the hour. So. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone, for your time, which is much appreciated. Have a fantastic week, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again this time next week. So see you all then. Thanks all.